Pierre Poilievre just granted an extremely rare one-on-one sit-down interview to the wife of a Shopify executive. And fun fact, she actually tweeted about this as I was filming a podcast episode last week on the rise of Canada's tech oligarchy, which so many of you guys listened to that we actually charted on Spotify's top Canadian podcast charts. So thank you so much. I am so unbelievably happy. But anyways, as he granted a one-on-one interview to a Shopify executive's wife, Poilievre also called the Parliamentary Press Gallery a, quote,
a small cabal of government-approved mouthpieces.
As opposed to mouthpieces approved by ultra-wealthy executives, I guess. But to be fair, maybe Candice Malcolm's Shopify executive husband doesn't actually approve of her work. He just happens to be, alongside her, one of the largest donors to it, and launched it with her and is on the board of directors, but she says he has no involvement. Anyways, I think it's really important to cut through the absolutely wild claims that Poilievre is making here and point out how he's lending credibility to right-wing outlets with spotty track records while denigrating all other media.
The traditional mainstream media has always been totally liberal.
And I've got some unique credibility to be able to talk about this because Pierre Poilievre once put out a press release specifically attacking me and my journalism. So, now to be clear, attacks on the media from government and political figures are dangerous, and you don't have to look far to find proof of that. Just look at Donald Trump. He has banned Associated Press reporters who work for one of the most trusted international wire agencies, which means that other news outlets pay for their journalism and publish it on their website. So these guys are some of the top dogs in international media. He banned them from the Oval Office and Air Force One indefinitely. Why? Because they won't call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America because, once again, they are an international news agency and other countries don't call it that. It's so funny how guys like Jordan Peterson will complain so loudly about the threat of compelled speech when it comes to respecting their students' preferred pronouns. But when it's the President of the United States trying to compel speech from international media, they don't seem to care. Amazing moral backbone, guys. Super ideologically consistent. But what happened that created this permissive environment where Trump is actually able to get away with censoring the Associated Press? Or at the very least, severely limiting their access? It was his attacks on them. Because if the public doesn't think the media is honest or doing their job properly, I'd bet money they're more likely to support politicians attacking them and ultimately censoring them and refusing to answer their questions. And it's in that climate that Poilievre has been using a lot of the same anti-media rhetoric as Trump. He'll vaguely attack news outlets as the liberal media, or Trudeau's personal propaganda outlets, or the woke mainstream media. He most recently used this rhetoric in his sit-down interview with Candice Malcolm, calling the media, as I mentioned earlier, a, quote, small cabal of government-approved mouthpieces, and claiming that when he holds a press conference, only, quote, liberal media can attend. Which, once again, is an example of every accusation being a confession. Because while humans are imperfect and there's always going to be a certain amount of subjectivity in our word choices and how we approach the news, CBC and CTV and all these other mainstream outlets will and have asked Trudeau and other politicians extremely tough questions. Meanwhile, if you look at the front page of the Substack where the Shopify executive's wife just published her sit down with Poilievre, side note, this is another super annoying detail, but basically she just launched a new outlet that's a collab with the Counter Signals Kian Bexte, who's a super annoying person. You know, he's the guy who went after Greta Thunberg, published the location of the hotel she was staying at in Calgary, and called her autism a mental illness. Yeah, they have recently launched this thing called Juno News, where they just seem to publish their stuff from True North and Counter Signal together. Anyways, but when you look at the front page of this news website, you see a completely uncritical write-up of Pierre Poilievre's speech from the weekend, for example, which has no fact-checking or analysis and might as well just be a transcript. And there's not one, but two articles about Mark Carney, who is currently the frontrunner in the Liberal leadership race to replace Justin Trudeau. One of which frames him as an elitist and a globalist, when in reality what he was saying in that quote, because I saw it, was that people will attack him as that. So that is immediately missing essential context in the headline. And another saying that he thinks that digital currency is the future of money, which if you don't have brainworms just kind of seems like a boring headline, but if you do have brainworms, sounds like it's part of a conspiracy theory. And go figure, if you look in the replies of the Juno News social media posts of this story, you see a bunch of people getting all conspiratorial with it. Anyways, you get the picture. Poilievre is also heavily restricting the media's ability and opportunities to question him, while giving a chunk of the very small number of questions he's willing to take at press conferences to less than reputable sites. Take this press conference, in which Poilievre took 4 questions total, no follow-ups. I watched this press conference in its entirety because I wanted to understand just how much Pierre's media relations guy took this clip out of context. Spoiler alert, very. But anyways, 2 of the questions came from a CBC reporter and a Radio-Canada reporter, which is French CBC. The other 2 came from Western Standard and True North. That's the same Western Standard that has failed multiple fact checks. And to give you an idea of how unserious they are, I've written multiple articles about my tweets and comments. Fan behavior. True North, meanwhile, has also been caught spreading deceptive information. And Platform, the founder of the far-right group The Proud Boys, which is now a designated terrorist entity in Canada and was at the time of their interview. An interview that they later took down because, as you can see, it was really hard-hitting. But it makes sense that these are the kinds of outlets that Poilievre is much more willing to talk to and take questions from. A simple Google search limited to their websites show that both of them kind of just uncritically write up Poilievre's announcements and statements. But when they cover either Trudeau or Carney, they all of a sudden know how to do critical journalism. Now, in that interview I mentioned earlier, the one with Candice Malcolm, Poilievre said he would continue this trend of allowing greater access to independent media. But it's not really about independent media, is it? I mean, I'm independent and Poilievre's team won't answer my emails. Although one of the last times they did, they sent me a write-up that read a lot like a press release, only to then release that press release calling me a so-called journalist. This was when I worked for Global News and I reported on his flirtations with the far right. So no, it's not about independent media. It's about giving access to media that reports on him uncritically while limiting access to those who hold him accountable. I don't really care if politicians ignore questions from bad faith so-called journalists who have a track record of failed fact checks, or those who use the times they're granted accreditation to launder their reputations, and use the times they're denied it for fundraisers and photo ops. Or if they ignore people like Candice's new news partner, Kian Bexte, who once, when he got kicked out of an event, walked by cameras with his hands behind his back like this, which just so happens to make it look like he's handcuffed when he's not. But sure, guys, it's the legacy media who is lying to you. So yeah, I don't care if politicians don't make time for Kian. But what I do care about is when politicians cut off access for journalists who actually do ask them tough fact-based questions and hold them to account, while filling interview rooms with biased simps who like to cosplay as journalists. What do you think of all this?